curtain that is discussing the separation between the Kodesh and the Kodesh Kodashim. Very good. And it's supposed to be a parochis which separates them. So what does that have to do with Parshas Lech Lecha? Again, it's not so clear, and at least in the beginning of the Maimer, because it's really a hemshich of the previous discussions. But essentially, when it comes to Avraham, just in a line, to discuss the previous Maimer, how we got to here, it says that Avram, which was his original name, right, turned into Avraham when he got the hay put into his name. And Avram represents a exalted wisdom. Av is the Kabbalistic language for Chokhmah. Father represents Chokhmah. Ram means exalted. So Avram, literally his name depicts his level. He was like the wisest person that ever lived at that time. And it means that he had a type of wisdom which was not shaykh to coming into the world. It was Avram. In other words, it was so exalted that it really could not be experienced. So the whole meaning of Lech Lecha was told to Avram. Lech Lecha is the idea of taking this level of exalted wisdom which is beyond this world and going into the world, and that's really accomplished by that putting a hay into his name. And the hay represents, the ability to draw something down, to express it. Vehi Baram is the Osios Avraham. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, there's a lot more that's going on in that mimer. It's very, very complex and deep. Why dafka the hay? And what's the mechanism? In other words, what's really going on there is that how can you get something which is completely beyond the world, a wisdom which the world cannot handle, and put it into the world, which is essentially what the whole Torah is all about. That's what the Torah is. And Avram was the beginning of the Torah. From 7 generations it required to this process, and he began the process of taking an exalted wisdom which is beyond the Bria and putting it into the Bria. Right? So Behi Baram is a completely different thing, but what he was just speaking about, because that's the normal Bria. In other words, he created the world with the hay. Right? Fine. But that means the Yud was higher than what the world can handle. Right? It says that he created the Olam Olam El Elyonim with the hay, Olam Haba with the Yud, and Olam Hazeh with the hay. So Behi Baram, which says in the Torah, that's the normal creation you create with the hay. But he's trying to get the Yud, right, which is the Chokhmah, which is beyond creation, to be expressed inside of this world. So that's already a whole much more complicated. That's the meaning of the giving of Torah, something which is beyond the world. Anyway, so we're dealing with the mechanism which provides for that, which is this sort of contraction, which is not the normal type of contraction. Because a normal type of contraction leaves the hay in one place and just gives like sort of the excess of the hay, the tachtonim, the chitzonius, and puts it into the world. This is the type of contraction which brings the thing in its pristine state and enables it nonetheless to come into a world. So in that vein, we continue into this mimer. Again, it's not exactly a hemshech. This stands on itself. But the Tzemach Tzedek, as it says in the Yom Yom, put 10,000 hours, or not 20,000 hours. I forget. I think it was 20,000 hours. That's a lot of hours. Into going through his grandfather's writings and compiling these Sfarim, Torah Or and Likutei Torah specifically, from all the Maimarim of his grandfather. And as we learned in the class on Shabbos, this we should keep in mind, because we're going to be spending a lot of time in the next couple of weeks with this book. It says that the year that was predicted in the Zohar, that the well springs from below and the windows of heaven would open from above, which would be his galus of Pnimius Torah in the world to prepare us for the time of Mashiach. It was essentially the printing of this book. That's what the Rabbi said in the Sicha. That when the Baal Shem Tov was 100 years before that date, and even the Alter Rebbe was before that date, but the printing of Torah Or and Likutei Torah was punct on that date, because that's ultimately when these wisdom became. Even the Tanya was printed before that. So it tells you something about what these Sfarim are. In other words, until we had Torah Or and Likutei Torah, the world was not really prepared for Mashiach. It's an amazing thing. Anyway, with no further ado, Vivdila paroches lechem. These will be separating curtains for you. Hine Beit Chaim avur sheyesh parsa. So in the Eitz Chaim, also a Sfas sefer there, it says the Arizal. It says that this paroches is called a parsa. It's obviously a spiritual thing which separates one world from the other. People may have heard of the parsa between Atzilus and Bria. There's the idea of this curtain which makes the light in one world in a completely different status than the light in the previous world, because there's the concept of a door, a window, and a hole, right? And a door, and it's the idea of contracting the light. The door is the biggest, the window is a little bit smaller, a hole is a tiny opening. But the one thing they all have in common is that the very same light that's outside comes inside. It just comes in lesser forms. So in general, that's the different realms within Atzilus itself. That as you go from the higher spheres of Atzilus to the lower spheres of Atzilus, yes, there's a minimization. It goes from Chokhmah to the Midos to Malchus. It goes lower, but it's all the same light. It's just less of it. But from Malchus of Atzilus to Bria, you throw a curtain in front of the window, or whatever it is, the hole. So the light that comes on the side of the curtain is already called Or Shel Tolda. It's really a different light. It's gone through some kind of a mechanism which changes its very nature, that the light you're seeing on one side is no longer the same light you're seeing on the other side. So this is what's normally called the parsa, the curtain. And this is basically what, in a certain sense, separates, the holy of the holies from the holy, etc. And the Gemara in Ksubos, he says that there the Gemara says there's Yud Gimel Paroches Hayu B'Mikdash Sheni. There was actually 13 curtains that hung in the second Beit Hamikdash, and he says what they are over there. Actually, I took a picture of it in case you guys asked. But in general, it's just Zayin Keneged Zayin Sharim. There's 7 curtains connected to the 7 gates that were how you got into the Beit Hamikdash, and whatever he says, a few more there. There's between the holy and the holy of holies. There was two. There was 2 that corresponded it above in like the attic. Interestingly, that corresponded to those 2 curtains, and there were several others. And he said, Perush Rashi, the Tzniusa Avidi. What were they there for? For Tznius. This is like the pshat of Rashi in the Gemara. What do you need curtains for in the Beit Hamikdash? The doors are open. Go ahead in. No, for tznius. It's just so you don't peek in and have like a peeping Tom into the Beit Hamikdash over there. V'hainu ki b'layla hayu asharim nin ali. And so the way it worked was that in the nighttime the gates were locked. You couldn't get into the Beit Hamikdash, and all these doors were closed. Yeah, we're starting class at 7:30. Just for all the newcomers here, I know Avram is not usually late, but we're making a big macha, a huge protest to every student that's going to walk into this room. 7:30 the class starts, and we're not going to start late. Otherwise, we're going to take a week off of Hasidus class.
No.
That's what's going to happen, because this is ridiculous. Okay? And you guys can figure it out. 7:30, pass on the word. He says like this, Ki B'layla, what you got there? Oh, you need a copy? I think this is a different one. You have to pass that there. Or you could take...
No.
Well, you can take a safer also. He says at the nighttime...
Wait, now is Rashi saying that
Rashi is explaining that the curtains were there for tznius.
He's saying that here.
He said it right here.
Oh,
The tzniusa avidi.
Okay.
Which means at the nighttime the gates were locked. You couldn't get into the Beit Hamikdash. Right? In fact, it was a whole serious situation where you had guards of Levim and Kohanim, and everybody was sort of on their post, and you can get in big trouble if you fell asleep. If you fell asleep, they could burn your clothes.
Yeah, if you want to wake up, they
could light your clothes on fire.
I was wondering, what was that for? They could have just poked you or something.
And the whole question is why did the Beit Hamikdash need to be guarded in the first place? Because it's basically, well, who's going to break into God's house? I mean, he's the best Shomer Yisrael.
Still, you have to guard it. Even the queen nowadays, you guard, but no one's going in.
Hold on a second. The queen, you have to guard because she could be a target of assassination or something. God is pretty much the one who's protecting everybody, right? So why does he need to be guarded? Is the question. So it says for what? There you go. That's exactly right. Likvod Abayis. It was something for the honor. Just a great palace. How could you go without guards? Nonetheless, they could be mamish. It says a Kohen didn't hold his place. They could bang his head in, and basically it sounds like they could kill the guy. It's crazy stuff. Anyway, So the gates were locked at night. K'te'isa Masechtes Tamid, as we learn from the Mishnah, the Gemara, Rak biyom hayu psuchim, only in the day they would open them. Shayu nichnasim v'yotzim derech pischei sharim, because that's how people would, of course, get in and out through these openings of the gates. Vayu muchrachim lios psuchim, and they had to be open. The same stringency of having them closed at night was having them open in the morning. There was someone appointed to this job. It was a whole avoda in the Beit Hamikdash just to open the gates. Afal pichein haya paroches. And despite the fact that they were open, and it was a big must that they had to be open, there was still this concept of the curtain. L'kol shar l'tznius. Every gate that was open had to be closed with a curtain for tznius, so to speak. So what's this all about? Kihine ha'azara v'alishkos hem mechuvanim neged malchus datzilus. So the whole Azara and the alishkas, the rooms that were in the Beit Hamikdash, right? So in other words, if you look at the picture of the Beit Hamikdash, you see this. Everyone knows kind of what the picture looks like.
I have a portrait in my room.
You have a portrait in your, but that's the outside of the Beit Hamikdash, right?
Yeah.
So you have basically the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim were in a building, right, called the Heichal, right? And they were two rooms inside. Inside the Kodesh of the Kadoshim, there was the Aron, and inside the Kodesh, there was the three implements: the menorah, the shulchan, and the mizbeach hazav, the golden altar. Right? And outside of that, you had a courtyard, okay, which contained inside of it the mizbeach nechoshes, the animal sacrifice altar, and that area was called the Azara, right? That area was called the Azara.
And the Kier.
The Kier was also in there. Okay, but then in the Beit Hamikdash, that was finally built. Okay, you also had, or actually even in the Midbar, you had what's called the courtyard, which was a whole other set of curtains which surrounded that. All right, and in this area is sort of the broader space of the whole Mikdash. And when they finally built the Beit Hamikdash in Yerushalayim, they put all these rooms in there, which you can look. You see if you see on the pictures, it's like there's all these quadrants, right? You've seen that, yeah. And those are called the lishkaos. That's called a lishka. Each room held different things, and it was very, very complex. Obviously, there's a whole long series of laws in the Rambam that we're supposed to read, that we actually did read this year together a little bit during the 3 weeks. You go into all the minute details. It was like a cavernous wonder. There's hallways and secret hallways and stairwells and all kinds of amazing intricacies going into the size of each wall, the size between the walls. Everything was exactly aligned. And what he's saying here is all this is not stam good architecture. It's a perfect replica of Malchus of Atzilus. Right? The whole thing is basically a physical manifestation of all the peculiarities and details of Malchus of Atzilus.
Wow.
Yeah, and everything that goes on there, including the idea of night and day in the Beit Hamikdash. Was a whole different type of world of what's going on in the Beit Hamikdash. Either you have guards and locked gates, or you have curtains and avoda going on. It was all mamish, a complete mirror of how things are going on Lamaila.
Good question.
Yeah.
Meaning that when the doors are closed, the curtains, the process are then put in place of those closed
Yeah.
doors?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Ki Lamaila, b'malchus, yesh kol b'china sheba'azara. Above in Malchus, they have all the different levels of the Azara. I'm just thinking of a story. Yeah, there's an interesting story. There was a rabbi who always used to bring the Rebbe his lulav and esrog to choose, before Sukkot, and it was always the same story. He would come in and bring like obviously the best of the best, of the lulavim, and one day he said he came in like he always would. He had 20 or 30 lulavim. He was carrying them like this in his arms, So the Rebbe would just pick one. It was like it wasn't the whole, because he already had the best of the best. And he came in and he had a bag of, I guess, hadassim and a bag of ravos, maybe. I don't remember exactly what he had in his hands, but the reason he was holding like this, because he was holding two other things. So he came into the Rebbe's room, And the Rebbe's like, okay, put those over there on the table, and put those over there. And he pointed to a place on the floor. And the Rebbe said that to him. So he said, on the floor? And the Rebbe says, what the floor? The krushim, not the floor. So the krushim means the boards of the floor, So he said from that point, it's a living Torah, one-on-one, interview. So he said from that point on, I realized, by the Rebbe, there's everything's levels upon levels. You go to the Rebbe's office, it's like a little mini Beit Hamikdash. There's the floor, there's the krushim, there's the chair. In other words, don't put them on the floor, put them on the krushim. It's a deep concept there.
You're not going to sleep on the floor, you're going to sleep on the crushing.
No, in other words, there's something called the floor, I guarantee you, in the Rebbe's office. It just wasn't the crushing, which was another place over there, which only seemed like the floor to a fool's eye. Okay, so anyway, here it is. So you had all these levels in the Azara that were really just mirroring what's going on in Malchus of Atzilus. The Gam Harabais, Tavkov Amma, right? And not just the Azara. The whole, like I said a moment ago, the whole Harabais, right? All these different gates. There was different walls, and there was different gates. There was different levels of kedusha inside of each one. The whole thing of Yerushalayim, it says there's Yerushalayim Dilamata, Dilasata, and Yerushalayim Dilaela, and the whole city of Yerushalayim is corresponding to really Malchus of Atzilus. So obviously, the closer in you go, the more panemius it gets.
The original feng shui.
Oh, yeah. I guess they borrowed it from the holy city. As it says in Parshas Zohar, Parshas Lech Lecha. In the Sefer Zohar, Parshas Lech Lecha. Hine, so it says over there that night, Trein the Gan Eden Astimu. That the gates of Gan Eden are closed at night. Right? So meaning to say that whatever's going on in Gan Eden, right, there's also night and day. Just like the Beit Hamikdash, there's night and day. Just like Bechlal in the world, there's night and day.
Does it go with the night over here?
Yes. In fact, night doesn't go with the night. It's what makes there be night over here. Right?
Oh, it makes it be night over here.
Yeah. In other words, we're a hishtalshelus from them. So by them, when it's nighttime, which means so what does it mean nighttime? They don't, it's not obviously a physical thing.
Right.
But the gates of Gan Eden close, so all of a sudden it makes it night. Right? Or whatever, vice versa, even up there also. There's something called night, there's something called the absence of hashpah, and so suddenly the gates close in Gan Eden.
So you take longer vacations in the winter?
And this is why we parallel this. In other words, the Beit Hamikdash is just like the Yidden used to walk around in the desert, in formation. In a certain sense, that's like the whole purpose of a Yid, to be bittul. We spoke about a second ago how Avraham his function was to bring something which is beyond the world and have it make a station in this world. Something which is completely beyond creation should somehow come into creation without losing its pristine perfection of being beyond creation, which is a contradiction, but that's the elukus of the matter. So the Yidden, from the beginning, we're all about being in formation. What did the Rebbe call us? He called us on the name that the Hashem called us when we first came out of the desert, which is called Tzivos Hashem. The legions of Hashem. We're like an army, right? Which is why you find Pashat by Lubavitch today, the whole thing is very much like a army-like, to the point that the Rebbe even called the children's program, and the Rebbe sort of had to answer for himself, because people say, the children's program, you're going to call the army of Hashem. Isn't that like kind of giving the wrong message to kids? But he said, you have to understand, it's like, this is the holy army, And the idea of the army, why was it so important that we're an army? Because it's all about the obedience to your level. It's all about being bittul, to recognize there's a general and there's lieutenants, right. And this one has this place and this one's doing this function. And we're all working together as a singular unity. So the whole Yidden, when they came out of the Midbar, they were in a formation. Reuven, Shimon on the south, etc. Each one with their flag, each one in their position corresponding to the Mishkan and so forth. So it's all because that's the way. You have to have, like the Torah is the total bittul. It's all about rules and regulations and putting things in a perfect order, because it's the only way to bring this divine reality, which is beyond creation, into this creation. It has a certain, lock. So he says the same thing when it comes to Lamaila. That the gates are closed down here because it's a parallel, the gates are closed up there. Hagam diksiv v'takam biyod laila v'titan teref levesa. So even though we say in the Eshet Chayal, in Shlomo HaMelech writes, and we sing it in Eshet Chayal, that she gets up in the middle of the night and she gives food to her house. And that's referring to in Hasidus language, that's the concept of what do you mean getting up at night and giving food to her house? It means even though the gates are closed, right? So that means that if the gates were really closed in Gan Eden, there would be no more shefa or life force flowing into this world whatsoever. It would be like end of existence. So there has to be some life force. So she gets up in the middle of the night and she feeds her house, means that apparently there is some kind of hashpah that's granted from Malchus of Atzilus to the lower worlds. Otherwise they would cease to exist. That's what it means she gets up at night and feeds her house. It says elsewhere that the Titen Teref Lebesa, Teref is the gematria of the 288 sparks, I guess plus the Kolel. And that's the idea that there's some kind of hashpah that comes out. But Hainu, so what's the story? Are the gates locked or is there hashpah? He says, Hainu b'chinas chitzoni is dafka. That is not the regular hashpah of the daytime. It's a chitzoni hashpah, it's a tiny ray. Right? It's still nighttime. The idea of nighttime is that the darkness represents the tzimtzum, is a huge contrast. Okay, there's still stars, there's still a moon, there's still a little bit of light. Right? And that's the idea of she gets up in the night and feeds her house, but still, it's only chitzonius. And he says, for example, like a person when he's sleeping. In other words, we're also a little miniature version of the Beit Hamikdash and of the whole universe. So we also have day and night, and it's called the waking hours and sleeping hours. And he says that when a person is sleeping, histalkus v'kibutz achayus min adam. This is what's called a histalkus, means a sort of a removal and a collection of the life force of the blood, hu nefesh, which is really the soul, l'toch haleiv. Right? It comes into the heart. In other words, what happens when you sleep is that your life force, it doesn't extend into your body the way it does when you're awake. That's what makes you be awake. There's a certain expression and hispashtus, extension of your life powers that sort of shoot into your whole body and enliven them. And since when you're sleeping, most of you looks like you're dead, right? So there's life force which is drawn from, it's called a histalkus of your life force from all your moving parts and active parts. And where does it go? It collects itself in the heart, he says here. And it just grabs all the life force and it gathers your panemius sort of more advanced functions, it gathers them all that level of life, it gathers them in the heart. Meaning to say that the inner panemius of the life force, which does express itself and go out from the heart the whole day long, it doesn't let it out during the time of sleep. Only a splinter of life is extended out. Just like we said, Titan Teref Lebesa. In other words, she does feed her house even at night, but only a splinter of life, not the real stuff. V'chitzonius. And so you might think that this is actually sort of a step down. And this is kind of what the whole mimer is about. That, you're only getting a chitzonius, you're only getting a ray, but in the reality is that at that time, the chitzonius aspect of life is finally able to express itself and sort of be utilized. In other words, there's the panemius and the chitzonius. When the panemius is shining, we're going to see in a second, the chitzonius doesn't really work as well. It's sort of nullified inside of that panemius. So when the panemius goes into hibernation, suddenly the chitzonius has its day in the sun, as it were, in the moon, as it were. And this is like the digestive powers of the soul. There's obviously when a person goes to sleep, it's healthy. A person who's sick, you say get some rest. Why rest? Because other functions of your body start to kick in, which do not function as well when you're awake, and they sort of take care of the underlying, body itself, digestive forces primarily.
Sometimes the brain is more active at night.
When you're sleeping.
Yeah, by some people.
Even so, it's a different type of brain. It's like the power of imagination. So it still doesn't take away your... In other words, you could say that the digestion is also more active at night. But again, the digestion also works during the day. But it's a certain certain parts of your brain doesn't shut down. But similarly, I would say the chitzonius parts of the brain get active at night. In other words, the brain also has its panemius and chitzonius. The parts you're not, what's for certain not happening is that you're not sitting there figuring out a Tosafos and like using your seichel in the way that you would when you're awake. That's obvious. But your brain is obviously still going. You're dreaming. You're imagining things. That's also the chitzonius of the brain. It's like the digestion of the brain. It's good for the brain as well to put itself to bed and allow the digestive, so to speak, qualities of the brain to work. And that's why a person, when they get up in the morning, they also understand things better than they did when they went to sleep. Just like your body feels better physically because that's exactly the point we're making. Other parts of the body, also the brain, start to have their moment of expression only when the panemius parts go to sleep. So actually, that's an interesting concept there. Shehen b'chinas chitzonius legabi koach haseichel v'amidos v'riya v'shmiya. And obviously the digestion is considered the chitzonius aspect of the body compared to intellect, emotions, sight, hearing, all the things that activate when you're awake. V'spashdusa ikaram b'shas sheina. And when do these powers of digestion, so to speak, imagination, if we can add our own thing here from Verrill's point, when do they come out? Primarily at night, during your sleep. Because when the time when you're not sleeping and the intellect is in full blast, then your digestion is not really working as well. And it's because they get lost in the big functioning, operations. It's like if you have a big factory, working in full blast. People who need to go there and like sort of clean out the engines, they can't work when the engines are running, Right. So they're there. I mean, you have those workers. They're just like sitting there waiting to do their job. They can't really function as well because they're included inside of the seichel. They get lost in there. They get bottled. Kener b'fnei avuka. He says like a flame before a torch. And you can have a lot of little flames inside of a torch, but you can't make them out because the torch is taking precedence. And therefore it holds back their expression. The expression of the seichel and the midos and the sight and all the functions of trying to basically keep yourself afloat in this crazy world, they dampen the expression of the digestion, etc. All these sort of other powers. But at the time of sleep, when it gets removed, the domination of the power of intellect, then they suddenly come out, and then suddenly the stomach starts to digest, and it sends its work to the liver. The liver fixes up the blood, sends it to the heart, and all kinds of wonderful processes start to happen.
The best time, they say, often we find that between 10 and 4. Everybody kicks in because there's
at night.
Yeah. And if you do that here, they'll be up for a class.
That's right.
I like
it. So all these powers of digestion and the like, hem kochos chitzonius v'tachtonius shebenefesh. They're really the lower powers of the soul, right? And so, again, but not insignificant powers, obviously. The body can't live without them. But the idea is that they're the lower powers of the soul. So what we're getting to really here, and sort of to give away the whole end, just because we kind of got to a point where we're getting there, is that what are these curtains really there to do, right? They're there to enable new and very significant powers of Hashem to surface. So even though you're not in the Holy of Holies, you think, all I want to be is in the Holy of Holies. Or you're not even in the Holy, you're in the Azara. Or you're not in the Azara, you're in the Harabayis. All these different levels of Kedusha. But they're all in Kedusha, And it's the idea is that in order for it to surface, the more subtle powers of the Eibishter, he has to go through this process of the Hishtalshelus. He's really explaining to us here, what's the Hishtalshelus for? Right? Hashem wants to bring out all of his kochos, so as a necessity to lower the levels and to sort of have this whole notion of high and low, because when the high is running on full steam, you can't make out the low. Right? So it's a very deep concept in a certain sense that, we always think about going lower is less than. But Adarabba, what's less than, why is per se, as far as the necessity of the body and the full scope of understanding the anatomy and so forth, is your intellect really less than your digestion? It maybe has a less sophisticated function in a certain sense, or less fancy function, but it's equally as necessity for survival and for the perfection of the organism. So in other words, in order to get there, you have to have these curtains all through.
But is that to sort of create vessels to receive more?
Say further, what do you mean by that?
The compartment is in a way to develop the vessels to be able to receive.
It refines it.
To refine.
Not only, yes, it refines, but in other words, you could refine is almost, I would say that, what do you have if all you have is a head? Right? And if you could say, what do you mean? In the head, I have the heart, and I have the eyes, I have the digestion. It's all in the head. But if it doesn't come out, what is a head? It's basically a scant, minimized, incomplete version of the whole. When the whole comes out, you can appreciate the value of the head over the feet. But in order to, so it's a total, it's a full package. You want to see what God is, you got to see head and foot.
Oh, it's just like the Jewish people, everyone is part of the whole.
Right. And dafka, only when you have the whole, it says if one Jew is missing, it's a puzzle Sefer Torah. Right? So you got to get all these different levels out so you can have the whole, so you can hold on to the essence. And that's kind of what we're saying here. The Avram thing that we talked about before. There's a need for Avram to come out of his hiding place and express himself in the lower worlds in order for the real essence to be seen. Okay, v'kach lamayla b'malchus d'Atzilus. So it is above in Malchus of Atzilus. Shabalayla train the Gan Eden astimu. That it says at the night time the gates of Gan Eden are locked. They're closed. Sha'ara shenimshach b'chinas Malchus b'Gan Eden ziva shechina, because the shine that's drawn b'chinas Malchus from the level of Malchus b'Gan Eden into Gan Eden, right? Because where's Gan Eden? Gan Eden is primarily discussed as Bria or Yetzira, which is Bria is the higher Gan Eden, Yetzira is the lower Gan Eden, right? So the shine that comes from Malchus to water the garden, as it were, Ziva Shechina, which is a ray of the Shechina being Malchus itself, so a ray of it comes to feed the Bria and Yetzira, Zeu Ikara Aras Penimius HaMalchus, right? This is, in other words, the general ray which comes when the gates are open is the penimius of Malchus. In other words, it's the full-on ray of the Shekhinah. And he says, what's the difference as far as Malchus is concerned itself? The Tzemach says here in parentheses, what's going on in Malchus itself when the gates are open versus when the gates are closed? In other words, when you're getting the full gamut of the ray, or just like a ray of a ray. So he says in parentheses, Hainu sham shachim b'chinas gimel reishin sheba Malchus. In the daytime, you receive from the gimel reishin, which is the three top spheres of Malchus, Chochma, Bina, and Das, or sometimes it's called Keser, Chochma, and Bina. Right? So in other words, during the daytime, you're able to get the penimius of Malchus is functioning, and therefore it's able to sort of overcome, it shines a tremendous light to the point that it makes it day. Right? It's full daylight coming from the Shekhinah down into the lower worlds.
That makes sense, because your seichel is there, it's in full
right.
capacity.
So the seichel of the source is shining, and therefore it creates there to be a seichel in the resulting place, right? In other words, your seichel, in other words, is a result of where you're getting it. Whether you have seichel or you don't have seichel, whether you're awake or sleeping, is dependent on what's shining to you. So he's saying that since what's shining to you is Malchus of Atzilus, when the seichel of Malchus of Atzilus is functioning, so you can have seichel down here below. It gives enough of a ray to not only enliven your digestion, but even your penimius powers. But when the seichel of Malchus of Atzilus goes to sleep, so to speak, so then all that shines into this world is the digestive power, so to speak, of Malchus, and therefore we are left without seichel.
The digestive powers again we mentioned was not seichel, it was like
the lower powers.
The lower powers of seichel.
No,
Everything.
Just like what's,
Right.
in other words, the chitzonius aspect, yeah, the sleep. Kamosh kasuv b'makom achar b'bir hazor parshas acharei. So in other words, we're a mirroring again of the surah. So b'layla mistalik ha'arazu, at nighttime, this shine of the ray of the Shekhinah is mistalik, right? The whole giving over of Malchus into the lower worlds stops. So it gets dark. Darkness is the engine of a tzimtzum. It's a major tzimtzum. If it wasn't for those stars and the moon, it would be mamish no life, right? There what gives us light. Elash hashpach hitzonius nimshach az. But what does come out then is it gives room for the moon. In other words, the moon's there in the daytime also, you just can't see it. The stars are all there in the daytime, you just can't see it. So again, it's this quality of, it's good to get dark, because things come out that you would never know were there unless the light goes away.
Light is blinding.
Light is blinding. V'hainu titin teref lebesa. And that's what it means. She gives her food to her house. What is her house? Bia. Bri Yitzir and Asiya still get fed, but they get fed the chitzonius. Hamshach hazu b'chinas zayin tachtona b'malchus. And the Tzemach Tzedek finishes his point that this aspect of nighttime, it doesn't come from the gimel reishim, from the 3 higher spheres of malchus. It comes from the lower 7 spheres of malchus.
At night.
At night.
Yeah.
And that's why there's a big tzimtzum and things are dark. Yeah. Okay, so we'll have our half an hour class here. And
It's pretty sad. We're gonna get half an hour more.
pretty sad turnout today here. We gotta see what we can do.
Could have 20 minutes.
Okay.